In the autumn of 1887, a crew of railroad surveyors working a remote stretch of the Kentucky Central Railway made a discovery that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. They were cutting through a dense thicket of rhododendron and hemlock along the Cumberland Plateau, blasting through rock that had not been disturbed since the earth first cooled, when the dynamite exposed something that did not belong there. It was not gold. It was not coal. It was not a fossil or an ancient bone. It was a small, leather-bound Bible, its pages dry as dead leaves, open to the book of Job. The ink had faded to the color of dried blood. And pressed between the pages, preserved by the cool, dark earth, was a photograph, a tintype of a woman with no name, no date, no inscription, just a face, young and serious, staring out from 100 years of silence. The surveyors did not report the Bible. They did not alert the local authorities. According to the journal of one surveyor, which I uncovered in the basement of the Cumberland Historical Society, they were afraid. A Bible buried so deep, sealed inside a limestone crevice that had not been opened since the Ice Age, could only have been placed there by human hands. But whose hands? And why? The surveyor's journal does not mention the photograph again. He simply notes that one of his men, a fellow named Oakes, took the Bible and the tintype and said he would return them to a church. He never did. Oakes disappeared 2 weeks later, last seen at a saloon in the town of Godolphin, a place so small it barely registered on any map. He left behind his tools, his horse, and an unpaid bar tab. His body was never found. The Bible and the photograph were later discovered in a trunk belonging to Oakes's sister, who had inherited his belongings. She had no idea how they came to be in her brother's possession. When she died in 1922, the trunk was moved to an attic in Lexington, where it remained forgotten for another 50 years. In 1982, a grandson of Oakes's sister opened the trunk and found the Bible, the photograph, and a single piece of paper on which someone, it is unclear who, had written a single word. Listen. The story you are about to hear is not a ghost story. It is not a legend. It is a true account of what happened in the mountains of southeastern Kentucky in the years after the Civil War. It is a story of a town that was erased from the records, a family that was destroyed, and a crime so terrible that the men who committed it believed they could bury the truth forever. They were wrong. The truth has a way of seeping through the cracks. It waits in the dark, patient as stone, until someone comes along who is willing to listen. In the spring of 1873, the people of Godolphin, Kentucky, were desperate. The town had been founded 20 years earlier by a group of settlers who believed they had found a paradise in the Cumberland Mountains. They were wrong. The soil was thin and rocky. The winters were brutal. And the land, as it turned out, was not theirs to claim. Godolphin sat on the edge of what was known as the Hollow, a deep, forested valley that the Cherokee had called Attagahai, or the Sealed Place. According to Cherokee tradition, Attagahai was a place of great power and great danger. It was not cursed, exactly, but it was sealed. Protected. The Cherokee had lived on the Cumberland Plateau for centuries, and they knew that the hollow was not to be disturbed. The white settlers did not believe in Cherokee traditions. They believed in land deeds, and they believed in God. So they built their town on the edge of the hollow and sent their men into the valley to clear the trees and plant their crops. Some of those men did not return. Others returned changed, with a look in their eyes that their wives could not explain. The town records of Godolphin are sparse. The county courthouse burned down in 1917, and most of the early documents were destroyed. But I have spent the past 4 years piecing together what happened from letters, newspaper clippings, and the journals of a few men who were there. What I have found is disturbing, and it raises questions that cannot be answered. The first question is this: who was the woman in the photograph? There is no record of her name in any census, no tombstone with her initials, no mention of her in any newspaper. She is a ghost, floating at the edge of history, invisible to the official record. The second question is more troubling: what happened to the people of Godolphin? By 1880, the town had vanished. The houses were abandoned, the church was boarded up, and the cemetery had been stripped of its headstones. It was as though the town had been deliberately erased. The third question, the one that kept me awake at night,
What did the surveyors find in the hollow in 1887? They were not looking for a Bible. They were looking for a route for the railroad. The Kentucky Central was pushing south, and the engineers had decided that the easiest path lay through the hollow. They were wrong. I spoke with a descendant of one of the surveyors, a woman named Eliza Hollister, who lives in a small house outside of Danville. She is 93 years old, and she remembers her grandfather, who was a young man when he worked on the railroad survey. She told me that her grandfather never spoke of what happened in the hollow. Not once. But she remembers that he had a Bible, a small, leather-bound Bible, that he kept hidden in a box under his bed. She said he opened it sometimes at night, and she could hear him whispering. She thought he was praying. She did not know about the photograph. She did not know about the word listen. She only knew that her grandfather was haunted. The story of Godolphin begins in earnest in 1869, when a man named Elias Harriman arrived in the town with his wife and 3 children. Elias was a schoolteacher, a former Union scout who had served in the mountains of eastern Tennessee. He was tall and thin, with a pale face and a calm, steady voice. He carried a Bible and a rifle, and he had a reputation for being a man who could not be frightened. Elias Harriman was the central character in the drama that unfolded in Godolphin. But he was not the hero. He was not the villain. He was something much more complicated, a man who knew the truth and could not stop himself from telling it. I found Elias Harriman's journal in a trunk at the University of Kentucky Library. The journal was purchased at an estate sale in the 1950s, and it had been catalogued as unidentified manuscript, circa 1870. It was a small, cloth-bound notebook, filled with Elias's cramped handwriting. The ink is faded, but the words are still readable. Here is what Elias Harriman wrote in his journal on a cold night in November 1870. I have been in Godolphin for over a year now, and I still cannot make sense of this place. The people are not what I expected. They are kind, to be sure, but there is a shadow over them. They do not speak of what lies in the hollow, and when I ask, they change the subject. The children will not go near the edge of the valley. The women make the sign of the cross when the sun goes down. I thought I had seen the worst of what men could do during the war, but there is something here that is worse than war. It is a secret, and it is eating them alive. I have decided to go into the hollow. I cannot explain why. I only know that I must. Elias Harriman did not tell his wife, Lydia, that he was planning to explore the hollow. He waited until she was asleep, then gathered his rifle, a lantern, and a small bag of supplies. He left a note on the kitchen table, explaining that he had gone to pray. He was gone for 3 days. When he returned, Lydia wrote in her own journal, which I found in the same trunk, that Elias looked as though he had aged 10 years. He refused to speak. He refused to eat. He locked himself in his study and began to write furiously. He wrote, and Lydia did not disturb him. In his journal, Elias Harriman described what he found in the hollow. It was not a natural place, he wrote. It was a place that had been intentionally shaped, by human hands. There were stone walls buried beneath the moss and the roots. There were carvings on the rock, symbols that he could not identify. And there was a clearing. In the center of the clearing, there was a large stone, flat and smooth, with a deep crack running through it. Elias Harriman was a rational man. He had seen the horrors of war. He had seen men die, and he had killed men himself. He was not a man who was easily shaken. But what he saw in the hollow changed him. Here is what he wrote. I knelt by the stone and brushed the moss from the surface. There were markings on it, not carved but burned into the rock. They were words. I could not understand them at first, but as I looked closer, I realized they were written in an old form of English. The same English my grandmother used in her prayers. The words were faded, but I could read them. Let the dead speak. Let the dead speak. Asterisk. Asterisk. I do not know who carved those words. I do not know how long they have been there. But I know now that the people of Godolphin know about this place. They have always known. And they are afraid. Elias Harriman kept his discovery a secret.
He did not tell the people of Godolphin what he had found. He did not even tell his wife. But he could not stop thinking about the words on the stone, and he could not stop thinking about the clearing. The question that consumed him was simple: what happened in that clearing? And who or what was buried there? The town of Godolphin was not a prosperous place. The people survived on subsistence farming, hunting, and occasional work at the local sawmill. But they had built a church, a schoolhouse, and a small general store. They had a minister, a man named Amos Whittle, who had been with them since the beginning. Amos Whittle was a complex figure. He was a man of faith, but he was also a man of secrets. He had been a chaplain in the Confederate Army, and he had seen things in the war that had broken him in ways he never fully recovered from. He had come to Godolphin to escape the world. He had not expected to find the hollow. I found a letter written by Amos Whittle to his brother in Virginia, dated 1868. In the letter, Whittle speaks of the hollow with a mixture of fear and reverence.
There is a place here, brother, that I cannot explain. The people call it the hollow, but it is something more than that. It is a wound. A wound in the land. I have felt it every time I walk past the edge. I cannot bring myself to enter it. I have tried. 3 times I have tried. And every time, I have been stopped by something I cannot name. A voice. A feeling. A presence. I fear that the people of this town have made a terrible mistake. They built their homes too close to the hollow. They have disturbed something that was not meant to be disturbed. I pray that God will forgive them, because I do not think the land will. In 1869, a year before Elias Harriman's arrival, a group of men from Godolphin decided to explore the hollow. They were led by a man named Silas Purdy, a former Confederate soldier who had lost his brother at Shiloh. Silas was a bitter man, full of anger and resentment. He believed that the hollow held buried gold, a cache of Confederate treasure that had been hidden in the mountains when the war ended. The men, there were 6 of them, entered the hollow on a Sunday morning, after church. They did not tell their families what they were doing. They took shovels, ropes, and a pickaxe. They were determined to find the gold. They were gone for a week. When they returned, they were changed. Silas Purdy refused to speak to anyone. He locked himself in his cabin and would not come out. One of the other men, a farmer named Jacob Hollins, was found wandering the woods near the hollow, his clothes torn and his eyes wild. He kept repeating the same phrase: "The dead are not sleeping. The dead are not sleeping." Jacob Hollins was taken to the church, where Amos Whittle tried to pray over him. It did no good. Jacob could not be calmed. He could not be reasoned with. He raved and wept and spoke of things that Whittle could not repeat. 3 days after he was found, Jacob Hollins died. The cause of death was recorded as exposure to the elements. But those who saw him said he died of fright. After Jacob's death, the town of Godolphin fell into a period of silence. No one spoke of the hollow. No one spoke of what Silas Purdy and his men had found. The men themselves were never the same. They withdrew from their families and their neighbors. They walked through the town with hollow eyes, as though they had seen the face of death and could not look away. Elias Harriman arrived in Godolphin a year later. He knew nothing of the hollow. He knew nothing of Jacob Hollins or Silas Purdy. He was looking for a quiet place to teach and raise his family. He had no idea that he had walked into a nightmare. Elias Harriman first learned about the hollow in the summer of 1870, from a child. He had been teaching at the schoolhouse, and one of his students, a boy named Thomas, had drawn a picture of a clearing in the forest. Thomas had drawn a large stone in the center of the clearing, and on the stone, he had written the same words that Elias would later see burned into the rock: "Let the dead speak." Elias asked Thomas what the picture meant. Thomas did not answer. He simply folded the picture and put it in his pocket. He did not come to school the next day. In fact, Thomas never came back to school.
His family moved away from Godolphin in the middle of the night, leaving behind their furniture and their livestock.
Elias was curious.
He asked his neighbors about Thomas and the clearing, but no one would speak. He sensed that the people of Godolphin were afraid, not of him, but of the hollow. He sensed that they knew more than they were willing to say. Elias was not a man who could let go of a mystery. He had served as a scout during the war, and he had learned to read the land, to track and observe and piece together the evidence. He began to walk past the edge of the hollow, watching the shadows and listening to the silence. He asked questions and recorded the answers in his journal. He found that the people of Godolphin had a history of disappearance. In the 20 years since the town was founded, more than a dozen people had vanished.
Men, women, and children.
Some had gone into the hollow and never returned. Others had simply vanished. One man, a woodcutter named Elias himself, no relation, had walked out of his cabin and was never seen again.
Elias Harriman became obsessed with the disappearances. He began to compile a list. He wrote down the names and the dates. He interviewed the families of the missing. He found that many of them had been in good health, with no reason to leave. Some had left behind money and possessions. Others had been seen at night, walking toward the hollow, as though they were in a trance. The journal entries from the summer of 1870 are filled with Elias's growing unease. He wrote, *I have lived in many places. I have seen death and madness. But I have never seen a place like this. The land is alive. I can feel it under my feet. It is waiting. I do not know for what, but it is waiting. I have begun to hear the voices at night. They come from the direction of the hollow. They are faint, like the rustle of leaves. I cannot make out the words. But I know they are speaking to me. I have decided to go back into the hollow. I must see the stone again. I must understand. Elias Harriman entered the hollow for the second time on a warm night in August. He took his journal, a lantern, and his rifle. He told his wife that he was going to check the traps in the forest. She did not believe him, but she did not stop him. He was gone for 2 days. When he returned, his face was pale and his hands were shaking. He sat in his study and wrote until dawn. The journal entries from this time are dark, fragmented, and strange. I found the clearing again. The stone was there, waiting. I knelt and read the words aloud, "Let the dead speak." And they did. I heard them. Voices from the earth. They spoke to me in a language I could not understand. But I felt what they were saying. They were crying out. They were in pain. I do not think the people of Godolphin are the first people to live here. There was something before. Something that was buried and forgotten. The voices are the voices of the dead. They are not at peace. They will never be at peace. I think I know what happened in the hollow. But I am afraid to write it down. If I write it down, it will become real. And I cannot bear that. What was Elias Harriman afraid to write? What had he discovered that was so terrible he could not bring himself to record it? I have spent years trying to answer these questions. I have traveled to Kentucky, to the site where Godolphin once stood. The town is gone, replaced by a thick forest. The hollow is still there, deep and dark, filled with shadows and mystery. I walked to the edge of the valley, but I could not bring myself to enter. I am not ashamed to admit that I was afraid. In the fall of 1870, a man arrived in Godolphin who would change everything. His name was Ezra Pennington, and he was a land agent representing the Cumberland Coal and Iron Company. He had been sent to purchase mineral rights in the area, and he had heard rumors of rich deposits in the hollow. Ezra Pennington was a city man. He wore a fine suit and carried a gold watch. He was smooth-talking and persuasive, and he had no patience for the superstitions of rural people. He believed that the hollow was simply land, and land was meant to be developed. The people of Godolphin did not trust Pennington. They sensed that he was looking for something other than coal and iron. When Pennington began to ask questions about the hollow, the people closed ranks. They refused to speak to him. They refused to sell their land. Pennington was frustrated. He began to investigate the hollow on his own. He hired a guide, a man named Lloyd Dillard, a former slave who had lived in the area for decades. Dillard knew the hollow better than anyone. He had grown up near the edge of the valley, and he had heard the stories about the sealed place. He knew better than to go too far into the hollow. But Pennington was determined. He promised Dillard a large sum of money, a small fortune, by the standards of the time, if he would guide him to the bottom of the hollow. Dillard hesitated, but the money was too much to refuse. He agreed. They entered the hollow together on a cold morning in November. Pennington carried a surveyor's transit and a notepad. Dillard carried a rifle and a lantern. The first few hours passed without incident. They followed a narrow trail through the trees, down a steep slope, toward the bottom of the valley. The land grew darker and colder. The trees began to twist and bend in strange shapes, their roots exposed like claws. Dillard stopped at one point and said, "This is where the voices start. You can hear them if you listen." Pennington dismissed the comment as superstition. He continued walking, pushing through the undergrowth. And then, Dillard later told his family, they found it. A cave entrance, hidden behind a screen of vines and boulders. The cave was not a natural formation. It had been shaped, carved, by human hands. There were markings on the stone, the same symbols that Elias Harriman had seen. Pennington was excited. He believed the cave was the entrance to an old mine. He pushed past Dillard and entered the cave. He did not come out. Dillard stood outside the cave for an hour, waiting. When Pennington did not return, he began to call his name. There was no answer. Dillard was afraid to enter the cave himself. He had heard the stories. He knew that the hollow was dangerous. He returned to Godolphin and told the people what had happened. No one was surprised. No one was sad. It was as though Pennington's fate had been inevitable. The disappearance of Ezra Pennington changed the town of Godolphin. The people had always been afraid, but now their fear had become tangible. They began to see the hollow as something more than a place. It was a presence. It was watching them, waiting for them. It would never let them go. Amos Whittle preached a sermon on the Sunday after Pennington's disappearance. He spoke of sin and judgment. He spoke of the dead and the living. He warned that the people of Godolphin had been chosen to pay for the sins of the past. "We are in a valley of decision," Whittle preached. The Lord has set before us life and death. We must choose. We must turn away from the hollow. We must seal it and forget it. If we do not, we will be destroyed. But the people of Godolphin could not forget the hollow. It was always there, at the edge of their town. It was in their dreams and in their thoughts. It was the thing they could not escape. Elias Harriman continued his investigation, despite the warnings. He went into the hollow again and again, searching for answers. He began to hear the voices more clearly. They were not just voices of the dead. They were voices of something older, something that had been buried long before the town was founded. In his journal, Elias wrote about his growing understanding of the hollow. There is a pattern here. I have begun to see it. The disappearances are not random. They follow a cycle. Every 3 years, someone vanishes. It has been happening for longer than anyone remembers. The Cherokee knew about it. They called it the night of the taking. They would leave offerings at the edge of the hollow: food, cloth, animal bones. They were trying to appease something. I do not believe in demons or ghosts. I believe in what I can see and what I can prove. But I cannot prove what is happening in the hollow. I can only feel it. There is something at the bottom of that valley. Something that has been waiting for a very long time. And it is not benevolent, asterisk. By the spring of 1871, Elias Harriman was a broken man. He no longer slept. He no longer ate properly. He spent his nights staring at the ceiling, listening to the voices. Lydia wrote in her journal that she feared for his soul. In May of 1871, Elias Harriman told his wife that he had made a decision. He was going to go to the bottom of the hollow. He was going to enter the cave that had swallowed Ezra Pennington. He was going to find the truth. Lydia begged him not to go. She told him that it would kill him. She told him that he was destroying himself and his family. But Elias could not be stopped. He had to know. On the night of May 15, 1871, Elias Harriman went into the hollow for the last time. He took his rifle, his journal, and a lantern. He left a note for his wife, asterisk, if I do not return, do not come looking for me. Burn this house and go. Do not look back, asterisk. He was never seen again. Lydia Harriman did not burn the house. She waited for 3 days, and when her husband did not return, she began to search for him. She went to the edge of the hollow and called his name. She heard no answer. She went to the neighbors and begged them to help her. They refused. The people of Godolphin had accepted their fate. They would not fight the hollow. They would not even speak of it. To them, Elias Harriman was another victim of the sealed place, and that was that. Lydia Harriman could not accept that. She was a determined woman, and she refused to let her husband become a forgotten memory. She began to write letters to the county authorities, to the state officials, to anyone who might help. She told them about the disappearances and the hollow. She told them about her husband. The authorities ignored her. In the winter of 1871, a group of men from the neighboring town of Laurel Grove came to Godolphin to investigate the disappearances. They were led by a man named Asa Morgan, a former Pinkerton agent who had a reputation for solving mysteries. Morgan was skeptical of supernatural explanations, but he believed that the disappearances were too consistent to be coincidental. He believed that someone or something was behind them. Morgan and his men searched the town and questioned the residents. They found no bodies, no witnesses, no evidence of foul play. But they found something else, a culture of fear. The people of Godolphin were terrified of the hollow. They would not discuss it. They would not even look in its direction. Morgan was not a believer in the supernatural, but he could not explain the fear. He had seen fear before, but this was something different. It was not the fear of a creature or a murderer. It was a fear of the land itself. Morgan attempted to enter the hollow, but his guides refused to lead him. He tried to go alone, but he could not find the entrance to the valley. The trails were overgrown and confusing, and the forest seemed to shift around him. He grew frustrated and abandoned the search. Before leaving Godolphin, Morgan wrote a report for the county sheriff. He wrote that the town was hopelessly superstitious and that the disappearances were likely the result of accidents and desertions. He recommended that no further investigation be conducted. The report was accepted. The case was closed. But the disappearances did not stop. In 1872, a young woman named Annabel Lee went into the hollow to pick berries. She was found 3 days later, wandering through the woods in a daze. She did not remember what had happened to her. She did not remember anything about the hollow. Annabel Lee was the only person ever to return from the hollow and speak of what she saw. I have found a brief account of her testimony, written by a doctor who examined her after she was found. She described a light, a beautiful light, at the bottom of the valley. She described a feeling of peace, a being held by something gentle and warm. She said that the voices were not voices of anger, but of sorrow. They are sad, she said. Asterisk, they are so sad. They want us to know that we are not alone. They want us to understand, asterisk. Annabel Lee recovered from her ordeal, but she was never the same. She became quiet and withdrawn. She spent long hours staring at the trees, listening for the voices that no one else could hear.
I spoke with a descendant of Annabel Lee's family, a woman named Beatrice Dawson. Beatrice is 86 years old, and she lives in a nursing home in Louisville. She remembers the stories her grandmother used to tell about the hollow. Grandma Annabel said that the hollow was full of souls, Beatrice told me. She said they were the souls of people who had been betrayed. People who had been killed and buried where no one could find them. She said they wanted justice. They wanted someone to tell their story. I asked Beatrice if she believed her grandmother. She was quiet for a long moment, and then she nodded. I believe, she said. I believe because I can feel it, too. Every time I dream, I hear the voices. They're not angry. They're just waiting. In 1873, the town of Godolphin died. It happened slowly at first, and then all at once. Families began to leave, packing their belongings and moving east, to the cities, or west, to the open plains. They did not say goodbye. They did not look back. By 1874, the town was empty. The church was abandoned. The schoolhouse was boarded up. The cabins were left to rot, their doors swinging open in the wind. The last person to leave was Amos Whittle. He had stayed longer than anyone else, trying to keep the town alive. But in the end, he could not do it. He wrote a final letter to his brother, dated 1874. The town is empty. The people are gone. I am the only one left, and I will not stay much longer. The hollow is swallowing everything. The trees are growing over the cabins. The voices are louder than ever. I can hear them day and night, I know now what happened here. I know what was buried in the hollow. And I know that the people who built this town knew it, too. They knew what they were doing. They were trying to hide something. A secret. A crime, I will not say what it was, because I am afraid that if I write it down, the secret will become mine. And I cannot carry it. I have carried too much already, God forgive us all. What was the secret of the hollow? What was the crime that the people of Godolphin were trying to hide? The answer, I believe, lies in the history of the land before the town was founded. Before the white settlers arrived, the hollow was a place of Cherokee burial and ceremony. The Cherokee did not bury their dead in the hollow, they used it as a place of spiritual retreat, a place where they could communicate with the ancestors. But the ancestors were not always kind. According to Cherokee oral tradition, there was a period of conflict in the hollow, a period of war and betrayal, when a group of Cherokee warriors were killed and buried in the valley. The warriors were not given proper rites, and their spirits were left to wander, trapped between worlds. When the white settlers arrived, they did not know about the warriors. They built their town on the edge of the hollow and began to cut down the trees. They disturbed the warriors' resting place, and the spirits began to call out. The call was a call for justice. The warriors wanted someone to find their bones, to give them a proper burial, to release them from their torment. But the settlers did not understand. They heard the voices and they were afraid. So they did what people always do when they are afraid, they pretended the voices were not there. The pretending did not work. The spirits grew restless, and they began to take people. The people who disappeared were not random victims, they were the descendants of the warriors' killers. The spirits were taking revenge. This is the theory I have developed over years of research. It is a theory that fits the facts. It explains the disappearances, the fear, and the silence. It explains why the town was erased. The people of Godolphin were not just afraid of the hollow, they were ashamed of what their ancestors had done. But there is another possibility, one that I have considered but cannot fully prove. What if the warriors were not the only ones buried in the hollow? What if there was something else? Something darker? In the 1860s, in the aftermath of the Civil War, a group of Confederate deserters fled to the Cumberland Mountains. They were desperate men, wanted for murder and theft. They sought refuge in the hollow, thinking they would be safe. They were wrong. The deserters did not find safety in the hollow, they found a secret. A secret so terrible that they could not keep it to themselves. According to local legend, the deserters discovered a series of caves in the hollow, caves that had been sealed for centuries. And inside those caves, they found something that should not exist. What they found has never been confirmed. But there are rumors, persistent and unsettling, of a ritual, a ceremony that the deserters performed in the clearing. They did it to protect themselves, to ward off the spirits. But the ritual did not work. The spirits were not appeased, they were enraged. And the deserters were consumed by their own creation. This is where the story becomes strange. Local legend holds that the deserters did not simply vanish, they transformed. They became something else. Something not entirely human. According to the stories, the people of Godolphin would sometimes see figures at the edge of the hollow, figures that looked like men but moved differently. The figures would stare at the town, their eyes burning with anger, and then they would vanish. I have no evidence for these legends. They are not mentioned in any journal or newspaper. They are passed down through generations of mountain families, whispered around fires and in kitchens. But they persist, and they point to something that cannot be dismissed. The hollow is not just a place, it is a wound. A wound in the fabric of the world. Something terrible happened there, and the memory of that event has seeped into the land, poisoning everything that grows in lives. The final piece of the puzzle is the Bible. The Bible that the surveyors found in 1887. I have studied it carefully. I have held it in my hands. And I have found something that no one else has noticed. The Bible is not a Bible at all. It is a book of Psalms, printed in 1843. The cover is leather, black and cracked. The pages are thin and yellow. On the inside cover, in faded ink, there is a name, Elias Harriman. The Bible belonged to Elias Harriman. The photograph is still there, tucked between the pages of Psalm 23. The photograph of the woman with no name. She is the heart of the mystery. She is the key. I have shown the photograph to historians, to genealogists, to experts in 19th century clothing. No one can identify her. But they all agree on one thing: she is not a typical mountain woman. Her dress is fine, her posture straight, her expression commanding. She is a person of importance, a person of power. Who was she? And why was her photograph hidden in Elias Harriman's Bible, buried deep in the hollow? I believe the woman was a Cherokee leader, someone who knew the secrets of the hollow. She might have been one of the warrior's descendants, someone who wanted to heal the wound. She gave her photograph to Elias Harriman, along with the Bible, as a token of trust. She believed he would help her. She was wrong. Elias Harriman went into the hollow to find the truth, but he was not prepared for what he found. The truth was not just about the warriors, it was about the world itself. It was about the nature of good and evil, and about the thin line that separates them. Elias Harriman did not die in the hollow. He vanished, and I believe he vanished intentionally. He realized that some secrets are too dangerous to share. He sealed himself in the hollow, willingly, to protect the rest of the world. The Bible was his message. He left it for someone to find. He left it to tell the story that no one else would tell. The word "listen" was written by someone else, perhaps by Elias's wife or by one of the surveyors. It is a message from beyond the grave. It is a plea. Listen to the voices. Listen to the dead. They have something to say. The town of Godolphin is gone now. The forest has reclaimed the land. The hollow is still there, hidden and waiting. But the voices are not angry anymore. They are sad. I have heard them. In my dreams, I have heard them. They speak to me in the language of sorrow. They want me to tell their story. They want the world to know what happened. I have done what I can. I have written this account. I have told the story of Elias Harriman, of the town of Godolphin, of the woman in the photograph. I have told the truth.
But there is one question that I cannot answer. One question that haunts me, even now. The woman in the photograph, who was she? Was she a victim of the hollow, or was she its keeper? Was she trying to save the world, or was she trying to destroy it? I do not know. I will never know. All I know is that the hollow is waiting. It is patient. It will outlive us all.
And the dead are still speaking.
Let the dead speak.